Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker.
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
All right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up.
Dodge this.
Hello and welcome to the Holy Moment Podcast, the podcast where we watch movies with you, discuss the moments that work, the moments that don't, and the moments that reflect, truth in unexpected ways. I'm Jeffrey Nichols, and I'm joined today here by my lovely co-host, Nathaniel Ario. Say hello, Nathaniel.
I appreciate, Jeffrey. You've been doing the podcast long enough where you burp in the middle of your intro and you're like, screw it. I'm just going to keep going. No need to redo that. I know the audiences at home will love that.
No, for sure. This is like them getting a taste of the real me. No 15-take Andy is what they called me in school. Not really, but they could.
When I just think of Jeffrey burping and tasting it, it just, delightens my heart.
It's just like, it's peak Jeffrey.
Peak Jeffrey.
But anyway, like that's neither here nor there. We're discussing the movie There Will Be Blood today, a film directed by Paul Thomas Anderson, starring Daniel Day-Lewis and Paul Dano. Nathaniel, what are some cursory thoughts on the film before we do a little deep dive?
Oh, my dear Jeffrey, the only cursory thoughts you guys need to know is this. My milkshake brings all the boys to the yard and they're like, it's better than yours. And they're like, it's better than yours. That was just like in my head for the last 2 days after I watched the movie. I need to, much how we did a AMV for Dougal to like a badass anime song. Have you seen like the lusting, like Peaky Blinders? Have you seen the edits where he's like walking in slow motion, all cool, and he has like, so it's kind of like a music video, but it's more like a fan edit. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think the kids call those thirst traps, Nathaniel.
Thirst traps. Okay, I need to make a thirst trap for Daniel Day-Lewis's character, Daniel, because he's a hot man who talks about milkshakes and then beats people's head ins with bowling balls. And it's everything I aspire to be in life.
Yeah, very handsome man, not a very handsome personality. He's got some issues that he's working through that he doesn't work through successfully.
What are you talking about? He worked through it quite literally with a bowling pin. He got rid of all of his issues by the end of the movie. He burned all the bridges so there were no issues to be had.
He is known, if not a man, obsessed with his work.
Yeah. He's an artur, he works hard. He's an oil man. He said it through and through from the beginning of the movie. I'm an oil man. Granted, he also preached that he was a family man, but I don't think that was true. But no, some real cursory thoughts. I mean, it wasn't a joke, bringing up the whole milkshake meme that this movie kind of sparked. The acting, the performance. I mean, gosh, I don't want to get into my holy moment now, but the performances that Daniel Day-Lewis and Paul Dano, is that how you pronounce his last name?
Paul Dano. I think it's Dano.
Okay. The two of them, their chemistry, their performance on the big screen was exhilarating. Absolutely peak cinema. I feel like they captured, and just my opinion, again, with storytelling in movies, the great thing is there's no one right way. There's great ways to tell stories out there. But how I perceive the best way to use film and cinema and the big silver screen was that type of performance. Just this exhilarating, life-filling. There's so much subtext, they feel real, but at the same time, they feel completely over the top. They're so fun to watch, and yet they're so heartbreaking. And that's my immediate takeaway. Just loved it.
Daniel Day-Lewis is a legendary actor, right? When most people think of The Method, they think of Daniel Day-Lewis, and they're right to consider him so, because this performance was magnificent, right? And then Paul Dano was a partner to match. He is a very specific kind of actor, and he is exactly the kind of actor that this movie needed. And I don't think the movie would have been the same without either of them playing who they were.
I'm happy you brought that up because you're completely right. This movie, I want to bring up just a slight tangent. What was it? What was the Catholic movie that came out earlier this year that went hard at the Oscars, or everyone thought it was going to? Maybe 2 years ago.
Catholic movie.
Jeffrey, you're Catholic. You should know this.
I know. Okay,
yeah,
Conclave.
With Ralpheus Phineas, or whatever his name is.
I think it's Ray Fiennes. It's not spelled that way, but
that actor, whom I love as well. This is an example. I think Conclave was a great movie, but the lead, Ray Phineas, was so good at acting that I feel like everyone in the room paled in comparison. Like you could feel the difference in skill. This movie, if it had that same issue, it would have been 10 times worse because again, the highlight of this movie was the acting. So if one person was pulling his punches, but then Paul wasn't able to pull his punches, it just would have been not nearly as good of a movie. So the fact that both Daniel and Paul were able to have this like weird, like authoritative chemistry, who's better, who's more of the man over the other, I feel like made the movie. So as much as we're praising Daniel, who I think had the stronger performance and was the main character, I still think Paul rose to the occasion and met him, which I think is just, hands up. That's an amazing accomplishment. Just did so good.
And they both imbued the characters with so much distinctive personality, right? That's the beauty of casting, because you read a role on paper, and that role can be embodied in so many different ways, right? By so many different people, right? And they're going to bring very different vibes, right? Very different feelings to those roles, and just the choices that they made, the way that they moved, the way that they spoke, really made these characters feel alive, right? They're very out there personalities, right? But they're personalities that I believed in, and that they were compelling to watch. But that actually brings me to a thing that I want to discuss is Quentin Tarantino came out with a very hot take concerning the movie There Will Be Blood 2 days ago. And this episode wasn't filmed around this tweet, but it's been getting a lot of steam online. So it makes me kind of curious to see how this episode does in light of that. But I want your thoughts on this quote. This is from Quentin Tarantino. Daniel Day-Lewis, the old-style craftsmanship quality to the film. It had an old Hollywood craftsmanship without trying to be like that. It was the only film he's ever done, and I brought it up to him, that doesn't have a set piece. The fire is the closest to a set piece. Yada, yada, yada. That's all glazing. That's all great. We all agree with that. But then he says, There Will Be Blood would stand a good chance at being number 1 or number 2 on this list of best movies if it didn't have a big, giant flaw in it. And the flaw is Paul Dano. Obviously, it's supposed to be a two-hander, but it's also drastically obvious that it's not a two-hander. Dano is weak sauce, man. He is the weak sister. Austin Butler would have been wonderful in that role. He's just such a weak, uninteresting guy. The weakest fucking actor in SAG.
Oh,
That's what Quentin Tarantino says about Paul Dano. And personally, that feels like a very mean-spirited comment. Incredibly unfair, and it feels personal.
yeah, that it does feel. It is interesting, these directors, Quentin Tarantino rubs shoulders with all these actors, so I wouldn't be surprised if you rubbed him the wrong way. But also, Quentin Tarantino, known for having very, very strong, striking opinions. I could imagine his opinion of acting, for whatever reason, it's not a personal thing, but genuinely, Paul Dano rubbed him the wrong way in a scene, and therefore it's like garbage. I think, first and foremost, even if I agree that I do think which I even just said a minute ago, I do think Daniel Day-Lewis had a stronger performance than Paul Dano. I do not think it was he was outclassed. If we're talking like boxers, it wasn't like Daniel Day-Lewis was like a heavyweight boxer and then Paul Dano was like a lightweight guy. I think they were boxing in the same arena. And I personally think it added to it because Daniel Day-Lewis, who played the character of Daniel, funny enough, was this charismatic, bigger than life. With his deep gravelly voice, he commanded the room. And Paul Daniel's character, Eli, I feel like was definitely more. I'm sorry, this is the best word I can kind of think to describe him. Like he was kind of sissy, like a little sissy boy. He was always groveling. He also had I'm going to talk about this later in the episode, but he also had a weird pride to him. But his pride wasn't loud and robust. His pride was quiet and slithering and conniving. So already that kind of like Daniel Day-Lewis has the high ground, or Daniel's character, Daniel, has the high ground, and Paul Dano's character, Eli, is kind of below him. So I feel like even the acting discrepancy, which I do think was there, I think actually played into it a little bit. I will say though, on second thought, I rewatched my two favorite scenes right before we started the podcast. In the middle of the movie where Daniel goes and visits Eli's church to let him know that a worker had died in the oil rig the night before. And we get this amazing scene of Eli giving a sermon, really creepy fire and brimstone sermon. And then my other favorite scene, the ending of the movie, where Daniel and Eli have their confrontation and they're arguing. I do think in hindsight, specifically the last scene, because the last scene, you get them going back and forth. The church scene, they don't really go back and forth. It's more just Eli or Dano talking. I think that last scene where they're supposed to be butting heads, I do think on a second rewatch, I do feel like Paul Dano's acting wasn't as good, and it did ever so slightly stand out in a poor way compared to Daniel Day-Lewis. But I did not get that on a first watch through. And even on a second watch through, I think it was a slight thing where I'm really looking for it. So would I agree that I think Daniel Day-Lewis did a better job? Yes. Do I think Paul Dano paled in comparison and failed and brought the movie down? Absolutely not.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they were going blow for blow, and I think that they were giving very different performances. They're both playing very prideful characters, but as you expressed, it's pride manifested in very different ways, and Paul Dano captured that, right? Uninteresting? Not at all, in my opinion. He's quiet, like he's little. Subdued's not the word because he's fucking weird. That weirdness, it matches in a weird way the energy of Daniel's character, right? They're both ruthlessly ambitious. They're both competitors. I think they're a great foil to one another, right? And that's the point is there is a night and day difference between Daniel and Eli. That's the idea. And I think that Quentin isn't really giving credit where credit's due here. But people have been just tearing into him for this for all the past 2 days.
I wonder how he's responding to it. As an actor yourself, Jeffrey, I mean, you just said it there. You think they went blow for blow. Do you have a preferred performance, and do you think there's any discrepancy? Did you feel at all that Daniel Day-Lewis was pulling a little above Paul, or do you really feel as an actor you're like, I think they both did, equal for what they were given?
I was fully immersed in the film. I think that their chemistry was very convincing to me. And that's what you're looking for when you're judging foils and scene partners. It's not so much, oh, like, is this actor better than that actor? It's how do they work together? And I think that as a team, they did phenomenally. And so I think it is kind of strange to say, oh, like one is better than the other when they really should be considered as like a unit. But I think personally, Daniel Day-Lewis is the better actor, right? I will say that, right? Maybe I'm contradicting myself there, but I didn't notice that when I was watching the film.
I definitely agree with you and that aspect, that I never felt like I was detracted from the story because of Paul Dano's acting. So I would disagree with him.
Yeah, I actually want to take this opportunity to say that I think that's a really shitty thing to do, to throw an actor under the bus like that.
Yeah.
And I think that Quentin Tarantino, he has a right to his opinions, but I mean, if he wants to work with people, I don't know. I mean, he is not in want for people to work with. He has his group, his clique. But I think as an actor, someone that enjoys acting, it was very disheartening to read that. And I think that he's not giving actors due respect. I think auteur theory, right? He definitely considers himself an auteur, like the sole driving force behind a movie, when in reality, there are so many hands in the pot, right? It's not just Paul Thomas Anderson's creation. It is Daniel Day-Lewis's creation. It is Paul Dano's creation. And the film would not be what it is without it.
Yeah, it does seem like just like a thing to controversy to have controversy. Like it is, I guess it's fine to share an opinion, especially like when you're in the film world. Like I mean, that's what we're doing. We have this podcast to share our opinions about films, but it does just seem like a nasty hearted thing to say, just also kind of like out of the blue randomly. Like why now? This movie was filmed in 2007. Why say, hey, you know what? By the way, F this guy for ruining this movie. Like it just seems odd.
But hey, I mean, it gives us good fodder to talk about for the podcast.
It'll make a great reel. Thank you, Quentin Tarantino. Which is a shame because I love me Quentin Tarantino. He's releasing Kill Bill. Kill Bill originally was supposed to be a 4-hour long movie, but the production company convinced him like, hey, we cannot do that. It has to be 2 parts. But they're re-releasing it in theaters as the full-length movie with a new, never seen like 12-minute animated portion that kind of helps glue the whole thing together.
I didn't know that. I thought that they were just releasing. I thought it was some sort of marathon event.
Yeah, nope. It's meant to be in its purest form, I guess. Kill Bill is meant to be a one standalone movie.
All right. Well, Quentin, you're a mean man, but you're also a mean director. So
yeah.
I'll be sad.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we've talked about performances, and there will be more to talk about. But I guess we should maybe move on to a little synopsis of the film so our audience isn't completely lost, assuming they haven't watched the movie, which they should, because this is a podcast where we watch movies with you, folks. So, as we've alluded to, this is a movie about an oil baron, right? Daniel. He is ruthlessly ambitious, right? He's selfish. He's very prideful, and he has very little patience, right? He's searching for oil at the beginning of the movie, and one of the people that's working for him ends up dying. It's an accident, and he leaves behind a son that Daniel takes as his own, not out of any sense of affection or responsibility, or maybe that is mixed in. I think that he's a more complex character than people like to give him credit for when they're talking about him. But immediately he starts using this child to present himself as a family man and to gain business connections. They end up being tipped off to a large pool of oil in this stretch of land that's owned by a poor family. A guy named Paul tips them off to this. He pays Paul, he buys the land, but there's an obstacle there. Because Paul's brother, his twin brother, Eli, knows that there's oil on that land and makes him give Eli $5,000 to build a church and agree to certain conditions before the land is sold. And they agree, and this begins a years-long rivalry between the two, right? That's Paul Dano's character, and that's Daniel Day-Lewis's character. This is just a movie of one-upmanship, right, between Eli and Daniel. And sometimes Daniel has the upper hand, sometimes Paul has the upper hand, or Eli, I should say. It's so confusing, like Paul, Dano, Daniel Day-Lewis, there's Paul Sunday, Eli Sunday, and then there's the oil baron Daniel. Did you catch that there were twins at the beginning? Because first time I watched that movie, I was a bit confused.
I was as well. And that was a point I was going to bring up. I was like, why isn't Paul saying anything? When Daniel showed up to the land to buy the land and he's talking to the dad, I'm going to buy your land. And Paul was sitting in the room and Daniel's trying to like undersell it because he's trying to be like, oh, I don't know, there's oil here. I'll pay you $6 an acre. I was like, wait, Paul is sitting there at the table. He's the one that told you about the oil. Of course he's going to be like, F you, it's worth more. Because at the time I didn't realize it's his twin brother Eli who didn't make the deal. So that was a point of contention. I actually thought they were going to do a whole twist where it's revealed he's schizophrenic and he is both Paul and Eli, but that was not the case.
Yeah, I think that they definitely could have done a better job of making that clear to the audience. Especially, it's like the same actor, right? And there's not much that they did to distinguish them.
I think it also undercuts the beginning rivalry because the first time we see Daniel Day-Lewis and Eli Sunday, not Paul Sunday's brother, interact, I thought it was Paul interacting with them. So I had a totally different vibe and subtext going on in my mind than, oh, this is the beginning of a rivalry. This is the beginning of two prideful men. I didn't have that there because I thought I thought Eli was Paul. So I just was operating under different pretenses. And therefore I do think that was a fault of the director/writer because you had that, I had that. My wife thought the same thing. So I do think it was an issue.
I think it would have been stronger if they were both the same. Like Paul reaches out to Daniel, like he's the one making the first move, making the first strike, right? And his intention is to trap him into this deal, right? But instead, Eli finds out about this like secondhand, and it makes him seem a little less competent. But then he proves himself to be more competent. And then at the end, he proves himself to be incompetent again. And that's just the roller coaster of the movie, which is, it's a fun ride. It's a good ride. It's a long ride. You and I were talking about this before the episode began, how you feel that this movie has some pacing issues. So like we can talk about that later. But here's one thing I want to talk about, right? We mentioned HW, his deaf child. What were your thoughts on that relationship? Did Daniel have a real love for HW at any point in the film?
I mean, you just asked the question of the century. I mean, you asked the crux of you asked the question that is, in my opinion, the highlight of the movie, but also the double-edged swords, the worst part of the movie. And this is what I mean. I don't know. I haven't heard a lot of rhetoric. I don't think that's the right word. That's way too fancy for it. I haven't heard a lot of people's opinions about this movie. I do know people like it. I am curious I have seen that people think this is an overrated movie because I think a lot of people they love the performance, they love the cinematography. It's won so many awards for leading actor, so many awards for cinematography. He won best lead actor Daniel Day Lewis at the Oscars for in 2020 or not 2027. Gosh, that's not even or 2025 in 2007. But I have read some things, the contentions of people being like, this is like a pretty movie that's boring and overrated. And in my opinion, I think it all comes down to Daniel's character. Because at the end of the day, something that I've enjoyed, beginning of 2025, you want to know how many Paul Thomas Anderson movies I'd seen? 0. End of 2025, 3. We watched Punch Drunk Love last season, and that was my Vegas pick. So he picked that movie for me to watch. And then I watched One Battle After Another in theaters because I was like, I just watched a Paul Thomas Anderson movie and I liked it. And then I watched There Will Be Blood. So 3 Paul Thomas Anderson movies. And what I realized, they all have this string of their character pieces, and we follow a character whose world is falling apart around them. And the choices they make in it either go to make it better or to make it worse. But often it's this stress inducing the world is falling around because of their actions and because of other people's actions. And it's like we're almost driven to insanity. Punch Drunk Love, we follow Adam Sandler and his kind of autism, weird way of not being able to express himself and his anger. Thankfully, the craziness in that movie ends happily. He gets the girl. One battle after another. We follow Leonardo DiCaprio. He's trying to chase down his daughter who has been kidnapped, and he's absolutely going crazy and he's whining and it's insanity. But that movie ends, I would say, middle of the ground. He saves his daughter, but he doesn't necessarily learn a lesson, and he's kind of a shitty father at the end of the day. There Will Be Blood. Daniel Day Lewis's character, Daniel. The world is kind of caving in around him, but it's because of his own actions, his own greed. And at the end of the day, he ends in the worst position. He might be alive, but he's burned all bridges, no one loves him, and he's sad and alone and an alcoholic. Okay, I paint that picture because I think it's important to understand Paul Thomas Anderson's kind of fascination with these character pieces to understand why I think this movie doesn't work perfectly, but is still amazing. And to wrap it all the way back around to HW, your first question, their relationship, does he love him? Daniel does seem to care for HW, but it's complex. And that's why I love the writing and Daniel's performance. It is not I love you, and then my greed overtakes that love, and now I no longer love you. Like you said at the beginning of the movie, Jeffrey, he took him in as a baby. He was like not even a year old. Did he take him in as a baby because he felt a responsibility to the kid because he was his coworker's kid? Did he take him in because he loved and cared for him? Or did he take him in because he purely saw him as a prop to expand his business? Because with a cute child, who could say no to me? Kind of like Paper Moon vibe, using a child to help with your cons. But the thing is, I don't think any one of those things are wrong. I don't think there is a black and white answer of why he took in the kid. And I think I can point to one scene in particular that I think paints Daniel's character perfectly. In the action where HW loses his hearing, the first thing we see is Daniel runs out into this fire hell tornado of oil exploding into the air. And he runs up and he grabs his kid. He doesn't check on anyone else. He doesn't try and save his money. He grabs his kid and he runs away. And he's hugging him. He's hugging him like such an infection, intimate way. They're rubbing cheeks. There's a very, very intimate, like father-son type way. Like he cares. It's not like oh no, if this boy is killed, then my business is going out of business. You could tell he cares for the kid. But after the kid is safe, put into a building away from the fire, Daniel goes back out and he sits there and he just watches the fire because in his mind, I've struck gold. The reason this fire is happening is because there is a sea of oil behind us. And one of his coworkers comes up and it's like, is the son okay? And he's like, yeah, he's in a building over there. He doesn't go check on the kid. He's now just enamored with this fire and what this means for his future. So I think that really shows the idea of he does love his son. His son was the first thing he protected. But then when he's presented with the idea of money, with power, it overshadows the child and the love he has for him. So I'll wrap it up. I know I've been talking a lot, but the point I'm trying to get at is I think Daniel's character is very complex. He is not, I care for my son, I care for money, back and forth. I think he cared for both and they got entangled and he was just a miserable person that didn't know what he wanted in life. Here is my gripe. I understand watching Daniel kind of go downhill, how his greed for money, he cut off his son, he has no one who loves him, and he's an alcoholic. But I don't know how we got there. What I mean is, I don't know if Daniel from the beginning of the movie hated people, or was he just ambitious? Was he greedy? He didn't seem like a money hungry capitalistic pig that I feel like I've seen in other movies. He seemed like there is a deep hole in his heart, in his being, that he was trying to fill. Like being powerful and having money was just the surface of trying to fill something. But I don't feel like we figured out what he was trying to fill or what he was running from. And that I feel like was a miss for me. If we had established something a little more with Daniel's character, a motivation, and then his descent into madness, I feel like it would have been a better movie. Okay, I'm done.
I do see a consistent through line with his character. I think that he is definitely chasing something that'll fill that hole in him. I don't think he recognizes that there is a hole, and I think he knows, or at least thinks he knows exactly what would fill that hole if that hole were there. And in his mind, that's money, that's power, that's control. And I think that he does hold other people in contempt. And I think he does view people as props, right? As tools to achieve his ends. And I think he is willing to talk himself, like talk a good game to investors. And I also agree with you that I think that he loves HW, right? But his priorities, right, are askew, right? He has several competing loves. And ultimately, the love that drives him is his love of self, right? His love of getting one up on his opponents. But there are some genuine like moments of tenderness between them that makes this character so compelling to me, and that make his quote unquote like descent all the more tragic. I feel like there is a world in which he had continued caring for HW, and that bond became the most important thing to him. I think that the introduction of his brother complicated things, because now he thinks that he's found someone that he can connect to, someone that he can almost take care of, but also someone he can work with to achieve his goals, right? And someone with similar life experience as him, someone that he can be vulnerable with. And that's where he admits to his brother that I hate people. I hate everyone. I'm angry all the time. And I don't want other people to get what they want. I want what they have. I also wonder if the fraud hadn't been found out, like what would that have done to him? I think that whether he chooses HW or he chooses his brother, either of those would have been preferable to what ended up happening was just a rejection of both. And I think that betrayal solidified that sense of distrust for the other, right? I can only rely on myself, right? And my wit and my gumption and my ability to achieve.
The betrayal was interesting because in hindsight, I do appreciate a little more the introduction of the brother, but it did feel a bit out of the blue. And that's another slight issue I have with the movie. And I think it all does stem back to Daniel's character. I just don't think, and it could have just been a me issue, but I think my wife had the same issue. It's just like, I just couldn't quite figure out why he was doing what he was doing. Because to me, it felt like good enough writing that it just wasn't money and greed. It just wasn't. There was something else going down, which is why I think it was good writing. Because I think if it was classic, I'm a money hungry, power driven person, I think it would have been more boring. The subtext made me believe it wasn't that, but then they gave no context to what it was. So it made me just be like, wait, what is Daniel's character doing? Oh, now there's a brother. So it just made me like have a hard time putting my finger on the pulse of the movie. And that was a little like hard throughout the movie. And so when things happen, like a brother showing up, it made me like, what's the story? But what I was going to say about the brother was I love the betrayal because did you notice what was the thing that tipped him off to what he wasn't his brother?
It was an inside joke. It was a piece of
It,
information.
it was that. But why did he ask that? He woke his brother up with a gun and asked him, what is this piece of information that only a brother would know? What made him want to ask that question? And at gunpoint. And at this point, he's already falling apart. You know, he already feels like the failure of a father. And he feels like the big oil business is laughing at him because he's a very insecure man. They're like, they have more money and more land than me. I need more money. I need more land. I'm failing. So he's already like kind of cracking under the pressure. Something happened that made him question, are you really my brother? And it's a conversation they had the night prior. where Daniel was talking about his hatred for humans and how he's like, all I want is what everyone else has. I want no one to succeed but me. I am such an ambitious man. And his brother's like, oh yeah, those days are gone for me. I just want to, I'll be happy serving you and just living out my days. And Daniel couldn't live with the reality that his flesh and blood, which means a reflection of himself, could be so weak. Because I think he did deep down, it's very clear by the end of the movie, he hates himself. He hates himself so much that he can't even have a grasp that he hates himself. He hates himself so much that he calls his son an orphan bastard and kicks him out of the family. He clearly hates himself. And I think in that scene, he also hated himself. It wasn't a truthful, oh, I hate humans and I'm so angry at them. I think it was a mask of, I hate myself. So when the person he found, oh, my brother, who must be like me, if I'm broken, he must be like broken like me. And his brother basically says, no, I'm not like you. I don't think he could handle it mentally. And that's what made him flip on, okay, I can't handle this mentally. So the truth is, he just must not be my brother. And that happened to be the truth. But that's why I think, maybe I'm reading way too much into it, but that type of subtext is what I loved about this movie. But like I said, I think there was great subtext with not enough context of what was really going on with Daniel.
That's an interesting similarity it has to The Kings of Summer that we watched last week, where you get enough subtext and the characters are written well enough that you believe in the choices that they're making. Even if you can't quite understand why they're making them, it feels real, but it's not satisfying.
And that is exactly how I felt. Now, granted, There Will Be Blood is leagues above The Kings of Summer. They're not even the same
Yeah.
ballpark. But
Yeah.
it is true. It is a crux of the same issue. But interestingly enough, The Kings of Summer had issue with payoff. They gave subtext for their payoffs, but not enough context. I think There Will Be Blood gave us a lot of subtext on what's going on with these characters, but not enough context at the beginning of the movie of what the frick is their motivation. So it's almost like a reversal on the issues I had with the movies.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. In this case, it's not so much like why are they making the decisions now? It's like what has been driving them this whole movie long.
If anything, the climax of There Will Be Blood helped me cement in, okay, I understand his character better. Like that final scene helped me to understand Daniel's character. I just wish I had known from the beginning and didn't know after 2 hours and 30 minutes.
Well, do you think maybe that was the point of at the end of the movie, we're finally getting the solid picture of who this man is after hours of trying to figure that out?
Maybe that would be an interesting idea if like he was written ambiguous to be like, is he a good guy that's just confused? Is he evil through and through? What is he? Maybe that was the point, but I just think the whole movie would have hit a lot harder if we had known from the beginning. In my opinion, it would have been the most interesting movie if we had gotten the reason why he drive. Like we opened this movie up with 12 minutes of silence of watching Daniel's character by himself dig this hole and search for this oil. Breaks his back, falls down in the well by himself, breaks his back, drags himself up, drags himself because his back is broken to like the oil prospect store to be like, I found oil. And so very clearly driven from the moment we met him. But I wish they had defined why he was driven. I feel like that would have made the rest of the movie so much better. Okay, I'm beating this point to death. That is my main issue with the movie, but I still love the movie outside of that issue.
No, that makes sense. How do you feel that the relationship between HW and Daniel like played out? Like, what is your assessment qualitatively of that? Do you think that was satisfying? What were your thoughts on those characters?
I think it was satisfying. I think, like, I really appreciate it. It would have been a worse movie if it was clear that Daniel just was using HW. So I appreciate that. I really love those scenes where he picks him up and they're both covered in oil. Jeffrey, I cannot tell you how many times I outwardly said, ugh, disgusting. Like, I can handle a lot of movies. When I have to think about actors being covered in a sticky substance like blood or oil, my skin crawls. I hate being sticky. But to see them covered in this oil, hugging each other, laying on the ground, rolling in the dirt, like they're just so much man on man intimacy in a non weird way. But to see that intimacy and how much he cared for him, rubbing his forehead, rubbing the oil out of his eyes, cheek to cheek. You know he loved him. You know he loved him without a doubt. But I think he just was so confused and hated himself and was greedy that he couldn't love his son properly. And then it's a big question of pride halfway through the movie after he sends his son away to like a death school because he didn't want to have to deal with them. And then the big oil shows up and it's like, hey, we'll buy your land. And he feels like he's being disrespected. But then he loses his shit when one of them very calmly says something about like, well, if you sell this money, you can take care of your son. And he takes it as a threat because he's very prideful. He's like, you don't think I can take care of my son? My son? Don't tell me how to be a father. And so that's when he really starts. So it's just interesting that he starts to unravel when someone accuses his manhood of around being a father. And I think that says a lot about his character. But I'm happy with how it ended. I'm happy that at the very end of the movie, he completely drove him away. He completely burned the bridge with his son. And the relationship was basically over.
I mean, the fact that he loved his son is so important to the baptism scene, right? The scene of him with Paul, or Eli, I should say, and Eli forcing this confession out of him that he has abandoned his son. Say it louder. I've abandoned my son, right? And he is yelling this out, eyes filled with rage, veins bulging. And he hates saying it, not only because he feels a very real guilt, but he feels the humiliation of the moment. And so it's interesting. What's being poked at by Eli's character is not only Daniel's love and guilt for his son, it's his love of himself, right? And I think that that's what the movie's about, is just competing loves. There are several things that Daniel loves genuinely, but where are they being ordered, right? What love takes priority in his mind and in his actions? And in the end, that love of self, which is a false love of self, it's actually a self-hatred that he doesn't recognize. It's this pride. That's what wins out in the end.
I like that. It's a story of different loves competing. Because I also think it's a story of pride. Because when the thing for the first half of the movie, Daniel's character is respectable. You don't quite know if he's swindling people. Yeah, sure. Like he has the line where they go out to the Sunday's farm where he eventually buys it and takes all the oil. And the son is like, they got a lot of oil here. Are we gonna buy it from him? And he's like, yeah, but we're gonna pay him pheasant prices. Basically, he was saying like, these are farmers who don't know the new age. They don't know how much their land is worth. We'll pay them, farm prices, not oil prices. So he's not like a perfect guy, but I personally don't get from the first half of the movie he's a piece of shit. Like you cannot like I do think that's intentional. You cannot tell if he's a garbage capitalistic oil man that will do whatever it takes to get up on another person, or if he has like a half decent heart with a little bit of greed.
The seeds are laying. He is opportunistic, right? He's not necessarily the worst man on planet Earth in that first half of the movie, but it's clearly shown that he is opportunistic and that he is willing to get one up on other people, right? But at this point, he also has this son that he loves and cares for. And that son does not have the complications that he would later have that would make it difficult for Daniel to love him and care for him.
And a reason I think it's so much about pride is because I feel like he had a facade. In the first half of the movie, he had everything under control. He had the money, he had the suits. If something went out of control, he could throw a little bit of money at it and it would be fine. Everything would be calm. He was calm, collective, and he was charismatic. He was. But when his son went deaf, he was maybe forced for the first time in his adult life without control. He cannot control his son anymore. He cannot help his son. He's spiraling out of control. And he's angry about it. This is when he starts to crack. The big oil people come in. He cracks under their pressure. But then a great scene is he gets angry at Paul. He gets angry at Eli because Eli's the preacher. And he's like, why couldn't your God save my son? But I think the subtext isn't there. Well, I think it's both. I think it's nuanced. Again, he's not black and white. I do think he's angry that his son is hurting and he can't help him. But I also think it's the first time in his life he has lost control over something and he can't gain it back. And therefore, he thinks people view him differently. He, I think, is constantly trying to control how people view him to be this in charge, charismatic person. And when he has this son that is now deformed in his mind, the oil people are laughing at him. God isn't helping him. The church people are laughing at him. and he attacks Eli. What a great scene of physical acting. They're rolling in the I want to know how they did it because it seems so practical. It seems like two actors rolling in the mud and Daniel's character shoving mud down Paul's throat. Seems very dangerous on an actor's level, but maybe there's a very simple practical way they pulled it off. But I'd love to know that's just real mud and they're just suffocating in it. But all that to be said, Daniel is a very prideful character who cares about his outward appearance, and everything falls apart around HW. The issue is HW is the intertwining of his pride, of his greed, but also of his love. So when HW is quote unquote lost to his deathness, it's not just he's losing a son who he loves, he's also losing control and his pride is being tested. So multiple things are coming to a head when he loses his deathness, which I think again is brilliantly written.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the movie, when he forces his deaf son to speak to him with his own voice, right? It's a very hard to watch scene. His son wants to dissolve the partnership, right? He is relinquishing, rather, he's taking back control from Daniel and to do his own thing. And that's a very scary thing for Daniel. And so rather than face the fact that his son will no longer be in his control, right? The way that you make that easy for yourself is by turning them into an enemy. I don't have to control you. I just have to defeat you, right? I have to humiliate you. And, HW has learned sign language at this point, which at the deaf school, they were discouraging that, right? They wanted to teach him how to read lips, right? Because that was the respectable way of communicating. And it also meant that he had to bend over backwards to fit into the surrounding environment. But him knowing a language, a way of communication that Daniel isn't privy to, right? That's also a loss of control. And so he is forcing HW to speak on his own terms, placing HW at his mercy and in a position of subordination. Yeah, it all comes back to that desire for control and that pride.
Yeah, which I think comes to a head in that final scene between Eli and Daniel. Because I feel like you said, they're going back and forth. One scene, Daniel has the upper hand, and then Eli's the upper hand, back and forth. And we finally think at the end of the movie, we see I love it because we cut forward and we see Daniel a drunk stupor. Like, yeah, he's a billionaire. He has a huge mansion. He has a bowling alley in his house for crying out loud. But he literally is so drunk that he fell asleep in his bowling alley. Also, just want to take a minute. What great choice as a filmmaker. You could have put that confrontation anywhere, but the whole movie feels like a Western. It feels like the Wild West. We're out in the saloons in the desert. And then all of a sudden we cut 10 years to the future or however many years. And we're now like in a relatively modern looking bowling alley in a house. It just really created a contrast and a unique location to end the movie. So just props to the writer there. But, we cut to Daniel wasted, hungover, asleep in his bowling alley house. And Eli comes in. He's a prim, proper dressed like a priest, talking gently, talking caringly. Oh, look, let me talk down. He's so much better than the drunk stupor. So when we start, it's all about, we talked a lot about this in our episode of Die Hard. In movies, you need a shift in power. Not even power, but you need a change. Every movie needs a change. Think of like positive and negative, like magnets. You might start the scene happy and then you're sad. You might start it with someone alive and now dead. You might start it with someone in a relationship, now not in a relationship. Those are very black and white drastic changes, but you need some type of change in a scene normally, conventionally, for it to be a good scene. And at the beginning, Eli quite literally has all the high ground. He's standing. Daniel's on the ground hungover. He is calm and collective. Daniel is hungover and drunk and a slob. And we look like he's angry and pitiful. Eli seems to be all put together. He's a priest. He's a man of honor. But then as the scenes unfold, we start to realize Daniel has nothing left. He doesn't care about Eli's prim and properness. And we start to realize Eli is poor and he needs this money. He starts to beg. We see this scene shift. Now all of a sudden Daniel has the power and Eli is the one on his knees begging. And it ends quite literally the opposite of how it started. Daniel bashes in Eli's head and he ends up on the ground dead. And we have Daniel there standing over his dead body. And so it's just that shift and change in that scene was so good.
When the butler, comes in to check on on Daniel. And what does Daniel say? He's like, I'm all finished in here.
Great line to end the movie. Also, you get the feeling that Butler has not his first time walking in on Daniel killing someone.
Sad and lonely man. Both of them sad and lonely people. At the end of the day, who do they have to rely on? Eli actually regards Daniel as his only friend, which is an odd. That might have just been a pretension, right? But these people have no real relationships, and the realest thing that they got at this point is each other. And then, of course, Daniel like kills Paul or Eli, I should say, and now it's just Daniel again.
What's the saying? Like misery to misery. Like
Yeah, misery invites company.
yeah,
Or
something like that. That seems their vibe. The two of them.
powerful dynamic, and it only could have been done by these two actors.
Sorry, Tarantino, but they did great. They crushed it.
Is there anything else about this movie that struck you as peculiar or well done, or things that we haven't talked about yet?
We definitely covered the main like this movie through and through is a character piece. It is acting. It is the performances. It is Paul Thomas Anderson allowing Daniel Day-Lewis and Paul Dano to have the breath and air and room to act. I love that there were those scenes where he just let them go, particularly Eli in the church, and then particularly Daniel at his bowling alley. They just got to act and go all out. So I feel like that's the highlight of the movie for me. Not just the highlight, but the crux of it, the point of it. But I think we'd be remiss. A lot of people love the cinematography. But to me, was it beautiful cinematography? Yes. But to me, it was just a form to present the real beauty, which was the acting. So honestly, I just was not impressed by the cinematography, but it just wasn't the point of the movie for me because I was so enthralled by every word that came out of the actors' mouths that cinematography became not the most important thing. Where I've had opposite movies, where I've had beautiful cinematography. It's what I focus on. It's what I'm gnawing on the whole movie, and the acting's like whatever. But for me, the acting overshadowed the cinematography. But as far as cinematography, did anything stand out to you?
I was the same way. I mean, yes, it was beautifully shot, but for me, it was. I mean, Daniel Day Lewis. Each role that he plays, he completely embodies a different person. The character he plays in Phantom Threads is very different from the character he plays in Lincoln. It's very different from the character he plays in There Will Be Blood, and he approaches each character with their own unique mannerisms and their own unique way of walking, their own unique way of talking, and that ability to embody another person. One of the most beautiful things about acting, in my opinion, is that it can be a profound exercise in empathy if you let it. The job of the actor is to justify the character to yourself, and I think that he's done a great job of doing that. He looks at the character, he researches the character, he tries to get into the mind of the character, and he looks for that shred of good that they're all pursuing. No character wakes up wanting to be malicious or evil. It's like I'm gonna do bad things today. No, there's something that they're searching for, and all the bad that accompanies their actions, they're done in pursuit of a goal that in their mind is a worthy goal. And then sometimes those goals are worthy, but perhaps not as worthy as they are in the minds of that character. It's just an ordering of priorities. And I think that Daniel Day-Lewis does a great job of creating empathy for the characters and making the characters believable in their goals.
I mean, it all comes back to that interview with I believe Christoph Waltz, is that the actor's name? Who
Yeah.
played the Nazi officer in Inglorious Bastards. One of, if not the best performances of all time, especially a villain.
Ironic since it's Quentin
Yeah,
Tarantino.
yeah, that is funny. Is Tarantino. Hate him or not, he makes good movies. But there's an interview with Christoph, and they were talking about specifically that role in Inglorious Bastards. And they're like, man, like everyone loves your villain. He's a Nazi, but he's so believable. Like how did you play such an evil guy? And he's like, I don't know what you mean. Like the Nazis didn't wake up in the morning and go, well, I'm an evil man today. Time to go be evil. He did not believe that his character was evil because his character wasn't evil in his character's mind. And that's how he got such a unique performance. And that just goes to what you're saying about Daniel Day-Lewis's character and believing and having empathy for Daniel, this sad, pitiful, prideful man.
And honestly, I'd say that that's my holy moment. Since Daniel is the focus character, even though Paul Dano and Daniel Day-Lewis have great chemistry, and the movie would not be what it is without it, how he embodied the character of Daniel, it's a marvel to watch. And it's a performance that we can continue to dig into and study and rewatch and get more from each time we come back to it.
Yeah, definitely a movie where if you rewatch it, I feel like you learn more about Daniel's character because it's so nuanced.
I think this is a movie that rewards rewatches in general, especially because people get confused at the beginning with Paul and Eli, right? The twin brothers. So at what point did you realize that they were two distinct
Oh
individuals?
gosh, it was a while. I feel like my wife pointed it out. I was like, "Are they the same?" And I think she said no. Well, no, you know what? It was really far in. It was the scene where Eli was having dinner with his mom and his father, the person that Daniel bought the land from. And he screams at his father and runs across the table being like, "You sent my brother Paul to make this deal with him. How dare you?" And that's when I was like, "Oh, it's his brother." He quite literally just said it. So it was like halfway through the movie. But for me, my holy moment, I was thinking about doing the performances, but instead of a specific performance, I'm going to do the final scene of the movie, the bowling alley scene, the confrontation between Eli and Daniel, the great, like, performance of Daniel Day-Lewis, probably the peak performance of the movie, culminating in the murder of Eli. It just has everything. It has the performance of Daniel Day-Lewis as the performance of Paul Dano. It What I also love about it is it's a scene. It's a scene in a movie. Sometimes movies don't feel like they have scenes. Like they just kind of feel like they go like Marvel. It just feels like they go from one location to the next, kind of talking. Everything's just like a long, blurry line. But this felt like such a contained scene. If I just like watched this 15-minute scene alone, I'd be a better human for it. Because it's so beautiful. It's so well done. And I also think it gives us some closure slash some revelation of Daniel's character, which was a main issue for me in the whole movie. And like I said before, I think it's brilliant to put it in the bowling alley. So everything about it is just classic. When I think of a movie, when I think of what I love in cinema, I would think of that scene. And for that reason, that is my holy moment. I think it encompasses everything perfect about that movie in 15 minutes.
That is a great point. Because in film school, our professor was telling us that each scene should be a microcosm of a story, right? Like a mini story that can be watched and understood even by someone that is lacking the surrounding context, right? Even if we don't understand everything about what's being said, we can understand the characters and who has the upper hand, and there is setup and there is payoff, right? Even within a scene. And that's an observation I'd never noticed that about Marvel movies, but I think you're right on the money there. With this, each scene is a scene and it holds its own.
It's an issue with Marvel movies, but it's an issue I find with most common new age movies. I just feel like I'm being dragged through from one conversation to a next to maybe get to an interesting looking set piece. It doesn't feel like a cohesive story with its own individual scenes that work as one specific Lego brick that then, as you pull out, creates a whole story. But the Lego brick still exists by itself.
And the thing that lends There Will Be Blood the ability to have very strong scenes that feel self contained is the rivalry between Eli and Daniel, right? Because in each scene that they're in, there are two very clear competitors, and in each scene there is a very clear winner and there is a very clear loser, and there are steps being made on both ends towards figuring out who is the winner of this scene.
And speaking to that note, the idea of like this rivalry between Eli and Daniel, I'm really happy it was the climax of the movie. Obviously, it has to be the climax because he kills someone. If he did not kill Eli at the end of the movie, I would have been angry that the movie was called There Will Be Blood. I love that it was called There Will Be Blood because of that ending. The idea of There Will Be Blood is like this idea of like throwing a bunch of uh, it's like a crock pot that's about to boil over. It's this term like if you go to Thanksgiving with your divorced parents, they have to be at the same Thanksgiving dinner. Oh, there will be blood. You don't think that there's actually going to be a murder. Like when you say that saying, you don't usually think about it as murder. It's like conflict. And so I like that this movie wasn't just a full blown massacre of like he killed all the townsmen or something. He was angry, so he went down with his AK-47 and blew everyone down. I like that it was a boiling point, and the boiling point was the final killing of Eli. There will be blood, and that was the blood. But the point I was trying to make was, I'm really happy that's what they ended it with. Because if they had ended it with the confrontation with his son, HW, which was the scene that was directly before the final one that we just talked about, the bowling alley scene, it would have shifted the importance to Daniel and HW, which would have made the movie much more a father son dynamic. And do I love my son? Do I not? Am I a greedy man? I think that HW storyline highlighted the greed and the brokenness in Daniel. I do not think it was the point of the movie. So the fact that the rivalry and the confrontation with Eli and Daniel was the final climax, I think was much better than if it was, I'm going to tell my son off and I'm going to burn this bridge and I'm going to reject him and tell him he's an orphan bastard. I'm happy that was not the full final climax of the movie.
Yeah, it's less a movie about rejecting love and more a movie about choosing hate.
Yeah.
With that being said, I think that this is a very fine movie. We've discussed before how I love movies that are boring and long. And so this movie is right up my alley. And, boring and long, I say that facetiously. It's a character piece. And the more time we get to spend with these characters that are so well written, so well acted, the better we can appreciate like the vision of the director and the vision of these particular performers. I'm going to give this a 4.
I think I'm going to give it a 4.6. And the reason why,
Ooh.
and I've mostly praised this movie for so many reasons, mostly the performances. But at the end of the day, in this day and age, it's hard to watch a movie that feels like a movie. And I know that's real vague, but this movie feels like a movie. Again, to me, it uses the language of cinema, from the cinematography to the ability of letting the actors have room to act, to not writing characters that are black and white, but giving them actual nuances, to having scenes that have shifts and change within them and they are standalone scenes, but they build up a bigger picture. And I also love artsy movies, and this was artsy in itself, but also had action. It felt like the point and the reason cinema was created, not specifically just to make this movie, but this type of movie. And for that reason, I'm giving it a 4.6. It's not getting a 5 because of my gripe with it took a really long time to figure out, in my opinion, what was going on in this movie because of the lack of context of Daniel's character.
Is that the highest rating you've ever given a film on the podcast?
No.
4.6 is very
I
high.
think I gave Grave with the Fireflies a 5.
Oh, yeah.
I might have ranked Little Women. Little Women might have been a 4.5.
Yeah, I think this is the second highest.
There's another.
then.
I might have. No, I didn't. I don't think I gave Come and See might have also been a 4.6, 4.7. That was also another really high one. And then
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
also Midnight Diner was a 4.5 ish. So there's a few right around there. I can't remember exactly the scores I gave.
Well, hey, high praise. And it's warranted
Oh,
praise.
also, we didn't even talk about it. It's a good thing it's high praise because guess what the category is for?
Yeah, the category was what will my co-host like, right? And it's funny because I chose this under a false assumption, right? I knew that I knew that you had enjoyed a lot of Aaron Sorkin movies. And the wires got crossed in my brain. I was thinking, well, we've watched several Paul Thomas Anderson movies. I mistook the two. I switched them up in my brain. And so I'm very happy that you ended up liking this a lot.
Yeah, it was a great pick. Been on my watch list for a really long time, so I'm really happy it paid off. You successfully picked a movie that I would like.
Okay, next time we do a category like this, it's going to be a movie my co-host would love.
Oh, I mean, I don't know. I'd say I loved it. At 4.6. That's good.
Yeah, that is really good.
Coming out of the gate swinging. But speaking of movies my co-host would love, I do believe that's what I got going on next week.
Yes. So that means that you're going to be hosting Fistful of Dollars.
Yeah, next week. So last two movies. Technically, because of the Christmas schedule and everything that's going on, we need to make this season 1 episode shorter than normal. So I have 2 movies left: Emmanuel, which is documentary for Vegas pick, and then A Fistful of Dollars for what my co-host like. We're gonna switch things up. We're gonna move Emmanuel to next season and do that for next season's Vegas pick, and we're gonna do A Fistful of Dollars because then Jeffrey's final pick will be Yojimbo, and those 2 movies very similar. Again, we'll get more into the story when we review them, but Yojimbo came first, and then A Fistful of Dollars actually got sued. So next week we'll be doing my pick of what would my co-host like, A Fistful of Dollars, and then the following week, the season finale. Kind of think of it as a 2-parter. The season finale will be Yojimbo, and then we'll go on a bit of a break. But you tell him, Jeffrey, what we're gonna do during our break.
Yeah, so we're going to go on a 2-week break, a 2-week hiatus, and during that time, we're going to continue posting reels on our social media, our TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. These reels are going to be of a more personal nature, right? We're going to be reflecting on our time with the podcast, the movies we've looked at, some thoughts that we weren't able to make plain in these episodes, and then also just our thoughts on cinema in general. giving you a little informal taste of who we are as filmmakers. And so you'll have that to look forward to. And we're also in that hiatus coming out with lost episodes. We filmed some episodes before we officially started our podcast. Those are like test episodes that have never been released. And we're going to release 2 of them in the span of time that we will be taking our break.
Whoa! Mystery episodes.
Woo!
See if they're any good, but our audio is definitely worse. But yeah, I'm super excited for it.
Well, with that being said, folks, you can find us at theholymomentpodcast@gmail.com if you want to send us an email. We're also on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, all those lovely places. Thanks for tuning in. Tune in next week when we discuss Fistful of Dollars. We love you and stay holy.
I still hate it.